Celebrity real estate agent Ryan Serhant just said, my #1 job will be moving people from New York to Florida again. And he's not wrong. In New York City, you're going to pay more, but get less. We're talking less square footage, less safety, and less bang for your buck overall when you're taking a look at New York City to Florida. But before you book that one-way ticket and you get that moving van scheduled, you want to know some of the major things and some of the major costs that come to moving and living in Florida. In today's video, we're going to start off by talking about one of the biggest issues in Florida and also one of the biggest costs for Florida homeowners. Then we're going to jump into some of the lifestyle changes that you're going to see from moving like a huge metropolitan area like New York City in the Northeast to moving down here in Florida and what some of those trade-offs are going to be. Then we're going to take a deep dive into the cost of living and taking a look at New York City and the entire state of Florida, looking at a couple of the major metros here. And then we're going to talk about politics, because at the end of the day, politics is kind of what's sparking this potential new wave of New Yorkers moving down to Florida. And that's what made Ryan Serhant say that quote, is that his #1 job is going to be moving New Yorkers to Florida once again. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is going to be the Florida dream and really look at the fine print. Many of the people that I know when I grew up in the Northeast, I was born in New York City, I lived in Pennsylvania, lived in New Jersey, I've lived throughout the entire Northeast, but many of the people know someone that is eventually looking to relocate to Florida. They're tired of the mess of the Northeast, the infrastructure, the traffic, the crowding, all that kind of stuff, and they want to get out of Dodge and in the 6 months of gray weather and head down to Florida. That's pretty much, I'm sure watching this, you know someone that has said that to you or is going to do it or has already moved down to Florida. It's just a thing up there. But many of the reasons that people move to Florida is because that it's supposed to be more affordable, right? They already know that there's no state income tax here, so that should save them several $1,000s a year just based on their job, assuming that their income is going to stay the same. But also the real estate down here versus what you get in New York City and the surrounding area there is going to be significantly cheaper here in Florida, especially when you're just looking at square footage. And just overall cost of living within the entire state of Florida, when we're talking about like going out to eat or maybe just buying groceries or gasoline, all of that across the board is going to be cheaper than the New York City and tri-state area. So just to give you a quick example of how you're going to save money when you move here, it's just going to be based off of the tax situation. When you take a look at New York City tax and state tax, it combines for about a 13% tax rate. But when you look at the income tax of Florida, it's 0%. So you're going to save money right off the bat, assuming your income is staying the same. Now, according to numerous sources, and you can even look it up on AI or whatever you want to do, but according to numerous sources, the cost of living in the state of Florida is going to be about 47% cheaper across the entire state than what you're looking at in the city of New York. So you're just going to have a huge difference in what your cost of living is, even though we all know here in Florida you may make a little bit less money. But the biggest thing that holds Florida back, and it's a huge problem in the state of Florida right now, is the insurance market here in Florida. And that's something that many people do not account for at all when they're thinking about moving to Florida. They think, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I'm moving down to South Florida. I'm going to buy a brand new house. My insurance isn't going to be that bad. The state of Florida averages just for homeowners insurance to be somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 a year. When you take a look at that nationally, most people are paying around $2,000 to $2,200 a year for their homeowners insurance. We're double that throughout the entire state of Florida. There's some areas of Florida where you could pay $10,000 a year for your insurance outside of flood insurance, which is another huge significant factor of the cost of insurance to this area, which could blow that cost of living out of the water. Just to give you a quick example, my sister and brother-in-law are buying a new construction home about 10 minutes away from me in Flood Zone X by Lennar. They're going to be building about a 2,300 square foot home for them. That's a 2-story home in the community, and their homeowners insurance on a monthly basis is going to be $60. This is for a brand new home built to the highest engineering standards in Flood Zone X in northeastern Florida. $60 a month is incredibly cheap. You should, on average, expect to pay about $100 to $150 a month if you are buying a new construction home in northeastern Florida, to round it out to be about $2,000 to $2,200 a year, which is on par with the rest of the United States. So the next part of this video, I want to take a look at some of the lifestyle changes that you're going to get when you're moving from the city or any metropolitan area in the Northeast to Florida, and it's going to be a pretty significant change. So what I want to do first off is take a look at what you're going to get with a $2,500 to $3,500 payment. We're going to hop over to Zillow because they have a great monthly payment feature I want to show you. Okay, so we've got the 5 boroughs of New York here, and I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in on where I used to live, and my dad still lives there, over in Sunset Park, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's not the best neighborhood in the world, it's not the worst neighborhood in the world, but it's one of the prime neighborhoods in terms of location for South Brooklyn. So let's just take a look there, and I'm also more familiar with it, so I can really compare and contrast what you're gonna get here versus what you're gonna get there. Now, this area isn't as expensive as neighboring Bay Ridge and neighboring, Park Slope over here. Park Slope's beautiful neighborhood, extremely expensive. But either way, what I did is I went into Zillow and I said, hey, let's look at and post a list price. Let's look at monthly payment and let's switch it up and put it between $2,500 and $3,500. This is assuming a $40,000 down payment and a credit score at 720 and above. We go ahead and apply that. So Sunset Park, my dad lives right off the park here on 40th Street. Let's just take a look here. So we got this one on 41st, and it's $419,000, roughly going to cost you about $3,100 a month. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, 750 square foot home. Now, this is right across Sunset Park, which is a beautiful, beautiful little park. Great views, some of the best views of Manhattan from Sunset. And also you can see the Statue of Liberty as well. And this is a super clean apartment for New York. Most New York City apartments do not look like this. So this is probably a higher price per square foot just based on how they utilize the space, how it's updated. I mean, this is a great little apartment for 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and 750 square feet. That's actually pretty big for a 1 bedroom. But you can tell that this is really well thought out. Wood floors, nice crown molding in the ceiling. It looks like it has a view of the backyard there, and then beautiful bathroom. This is, not your standard New York City bathroom at all. Nice little living dining room as well. Actually, some really great living space here. Oh, it has a little, this is the fire escape. But they're just going to show the rest of the building, and right across from Sunset Park, which is a fantastic location. But you're not getting that much. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, that's not, that's going to be very suitable for a lot of people, So let's just go ahead and take a look at St. Augustine. And we'll take, St. Augustine, Florida, between $2,500 and $3,500, you can get a home just like this. So this home, this is the first one I saw, 419 Sevilla Drive. This is in the Shores community. 3-bed, 2-bath, 2,223 square feet. And this is actually a pool home, which is pretty sweet. Backs up to a little preserve/lake area. This is going to be in flood zone X, so you're not going to have to worry about any flooding or any large insurance bills for flood insurance. Obviously, the home needs a little bit of updating. It's definitely not as updated as that 1 bedroom that we saw, but you're also getting almost 3 times the amount of square footage. You're getting a single family home that's attached. You're also getting a pool and more living space. And aside from that, this is actually in the Shores community where your HOA is only going to be about $34 a month. And then if you want access to the amenity center here, it's only $350 a year, and it's optional. So you don't even need to pay for it if you don't want to. But you can see you obviously get a lot more space, a lot more bang for your buck here in St. Augustine, which is actually one of the more expensive areas in the entire state of Florida than you would in New York City. And that's for sure. That's a no-brainer, right? We already knew that. Okay, so we took a look at the houses, right? And the one major thing that's going to be a difference here between living in the city and living in Florida is like public transportation is non-existent. Now, living in Sunset Park, you have a variety of trains that go right there, but the D is going to be the main train that you're going to take into the city. It's only going to be 2 express stops to Manhattan. You can get into Tribeca very easily, and I used to do that commute all the time. It was very convenient, especially when you're talking about the city. You didn't need to have a car. The rest of the state of Florida is not like that. There's not very many areas where you cannot have a car in the state of Florida. But the good thing is that you don't need to pay for parking 90% of the places that you go. So you just pay for your car, it sits out in your driveway, and then you go to shopping or whatever, you go to the store. Almost all these places have free parking, whereas if you were to have a car in the city, finding free parking is possible, but it's a huge pain, and paying for parking is it's at least 20 bucks just to get in the garage for a lot of places. So in general, once you factor in like a car payment and you also talk about like insurance, it's probably going to cost you more in terms of transportation here than it would in New York City, because at the end of the day, you can get a monthly Metro Pass for about 130 bucks versus like that's probably going to be the cost of your insurance at least on one of the vehicles that you have down here. And that's just one vehicle, right? So it's going to lose out in that aspect, but at the end of the day, you're in control. You're not waiting for the train, you're not waiting for the bus. You're able to be in the driver's seat unless there's some some massive accident or something. The other thing is weather. Now, we live in the Sunshine State, and in reality it is. The majority of the year it is sunny and beautiful. Of course we have hurricanes, of course we have rainy days, but in general, throughout the majority of the year in Florida, it's going to be about 85 and sunny across the entire state. Now, if you go further south, it's going to get hotter. If you go further north, it's going to get cooler. For example, here in the northern part of Florida, we actually do get a little bit of chill in the air. So when it gets down to the winter, you can throw on a hoodie, you could throw on a jacket. You know, at night, sometimes for a couple weeks out of the year, it'll get down into like the 30s and 40s. And really, for most Floridians, once we get south of 70 degrees, that's when you start seeing people busting out long sleeves, maybe even a hoodie, just because once you're down here and you're living the Florida lifestyle, you start to acclimate to that heat and that humidity to where really anything under 70, I now feel like I get a little chilly. Then of course you also have the social pace. Now living in New York City, it's hard to beat. I loved every bit of living in the city. I love the walkability of it. I love going to the little mom and pop restaurants and the stores around there. But I do feel like that is kind of more or less getting pushed out and becoming more and more commercial as we go along into the future. But you can't beat that fast energy, the social aspect of New York City versus the state of Florida. Most of your social activity is going to be a slower pace. You know, when it comes down to even just formality, like up north, a lot of people wear suits and ties and dresses and all that kind of stuff. Here in Florida, it's just too damn hot. You know, like in reality, like I'm going to wear shorts to our showings because you want me sweating, you want my shins sweating, and you see me sweating through my pants and my shirt. It doesn't make good sense for me to wear a suit. So there's a lot of differences here when it comes down to like the social aspect, whereas like some people just show up in flip-flops, right? And that's the Florida lifestyle, right? And that's kind of why people want to move here. So if you're looking for like a fast-paced, you know, move energy of the city, then you're probably going to want to look at like a Tampa or a Miami or maybe even like Orlando. But outside of that, there's not going to be too much for you here in New York or in Florida. Now, in terms of schools, both the states grade everything differently. Like it's completely subjective. There's people that live here and say like, oh, our schools are the best. There's people that are in New York City and say, oh, our schools are the best up there. They're graded completely differently, and the reason I know that is because I know how they grade here in Florida. They base it off of standardized tests, and my wife's mom is actually a New York City public educator. She told me that they don't really base it off of standardized tests. It's more about like critical thinking versus the standardized test. So two different ways and two different styles of teaching and evaluating kids. Really hard to compare the two, but if you are looking for a great school district, St. Johns County, like I've already covered, a lot of the main things where St. Augustine is when it comes down to the price of homes, when it comes down to the amount of hurricanes that we have to deal with, the cost of insurance. St. Johns County is going to win out, but on top of that, we have the #1 or #2 school district. It really just depends on the year. For all of, I think there's 63 districts in the entire state of Florida, or 64. We've been #1 or #2 for many, many years. Many of the schools here are rated A. Over 70% of them are rated A. And I think we only have a handful of schools that are C or D. I don't think we have any that are D. I actually think they're only C and B. And that's something important to know. When you're looking at the state of Florida, everything is graded here on a letter basis. So if you're looking at Zillow, a lot of the times on Zillow, it's a numerical value. What you want to do is then cross-reference the Florida Department of Education to see what their grade actually is, because the numerical value can be misleading. So overall, I've lived in both places. I definitely feel the quality of life is better here in the state of Florida than it is in New York City. And don't get me wrong, I love New York for what it is. But when it talks about like space and time and quality of life for your family, I do think Florida's going to win out on that. I'm sorry, New Yorkers. I do feel that way. So the next thing that I want to do is take a look at the median household income and compare it from New York City to a couple different areas in the state of Florida, just so you get an idea of like what you're going to get into. Let's check it out. So what I did is I pulled the median household income for New York City, St. Johns County, Miami, Orlando, and Tampa, some of the major metropolitan markets in our area, but also St. Johns County, which is where St. Augustine is, just so you can see how everything stacks up. So obviously, median household income for New York is $84,000, which in reality, I was really surprised to see that number. I thought it would be over six figures. St. Johns County's median income is actually beating them, $90,900. And I don't think it's because we have great paying jobs here. We don't, right? But we have a lot of government jobs that start around $50,000, but also we have about 25% of our workforce is remote workers. So they're probably bringing in and pulling that average up pretty significantly, especially when you're comparing it to the rest of the state of Florida. So you take a look at Miami, $64,000. Take a look at Orlando, $65,000 for household income, and Tampa, $67,000. So St. Johns County is pulling in almost 33% more than what the rest of Florida is, which is pretty significant, and even more than New York City, which I think is really interesting as well. But when you take a cost of living versus New York City, in all areas we're at least 40% lower. On top of that, we also have 0% income tax. So I went down a rabbit hole for you guys, and I just wanted to, this took me a lot longer, but what I did is I went into ChatGPT and I used the AI system there to just base it off of a $100,000 medium household income and just break everything down and put everything I could think of in there in terms of like real estate, taxes, just your general cost of living for like gasoline and food, all that kind of stuff I wanted to put in there. Let's take a look at what ChatGPT had to say. So I asked ChatGPT, can you break down the cost of living based on New York City versus Florida? Can you use Tampa, Miami, Orlando, and St. Johns County to make the comparison? I'd like you to consider all the factors, cost of real estate, taxes, insurance, lifestyle choices, and base it off the household income of $100,000. Absolutely. Let's break it down and let's take a look at it all. So when we take a look at housing costs, we use the same cities just so we can keep it consistent. But you can see median home price in New York City and the outer boroughs is going to be 700,000 plus. We all know that, like, just based on what we saw, the median is you have the bottom of the barrel, and it's just the middle between the top and the bottom, right? So we're going to see huge spreads across here, really, when you're talking about New York City. But average rent for a 2-bedroom is going to be around $3,200 a month. In St. Johns County, I'm going to say the average rent for 2 bedrooms is probably going to be around $2,000. So this might be a little bit off, but take a look at the numbers here in terms of your percent of income. So if you're making $100,000 a year as a household, 50 to 60% of your income is going to go to your mortgage. Compare that to Miami, 45 to 48, Tampa, 30 to 33, Orlando, 28 to 31, and St. Johns County, 38 to 40%. So the takeaway there is New York City and Miami are both significantly more expensive for housing. Tampa or Orlando allow you to stay within more manageable housing costs under $100K income. Now let's take a look at taxes. Now, of course, we don't have any income tax here in the state of Florida, but New York City and New York State is going to be about 10 to 12%. Then they have a sales tax almost 9% in New York City, whereas in Florida it's going to be 6.5% to 7.5%. And then property tax of about 1.7%, where Florida is going to be about 0.8 to 1.1%. So when you're taking a look at taxes, Florida's going to win across the board. So as long as your income stays the same, you should be fine. Now, this is where Florida's going to lose. Insurance costs, right? We talked about that earlier. So New York City, your insurance is going to cost you roughly $1,200 a year. Average auto insurance is going to be roughly $2,000 a year. Miami, average homeowners insurance, $6,000 to $10,000 a year. Going to be the most expensive in the entire state of Florida. Tampa, $4,500 per year, and then Orlando, $3,500 per year. And like I said, this is probably closer for Orlando and St. Johns County just because we're a little bit north, a little bit more protected from hurricanes. We're really seeing it between $2,200 to maybe $3,000 a year, opposed to this number here. So I can show you insurance quotes from my guy, but this is what we're seeing. Average auto insurance, about the same across the board. Miami, once again, going to be more expensive. $3,200 a year versus $2,000 in New York City, and St. Johns County, North Florida, representing the North, we got $2,200 per year. So we have a lot higher insurance costs here in the state of Florida than you do in New York City. But if you're looking for something that's more along the norm, once again, St. Johns County wins. Living in St. Augustine is some of the best in the entire state of Florida. I can promise you that. And you can always go visit the other states of Florida. And that's one thing that a lot of people do here in the state of Florida is they barely leave, right? A lot of people vacation in the state. So if you're, typically go down to Disney or Universal, or you want to go down to the Keys, or you want to go to Destin and see the West Coast and see what's going on over there. Tampa is also really cool. Miami obviously has its own thing going, and Orlando, big tourist hub. But then you also have St. Augustine. People visit from the south, from the north, all over the state of Florida because St. Augustine's the nation's oldest city and it's beautiful. So let's quickly take a look at lifestyle and utilities. So you can see here that utilities are going to cost you about $150 a month. Because we got AC running all the time, it's going to cost you about $250 a month. Groceries are going to be high in New York City. We're going to be about 10 to 15% lower. Dining out, very high. We're going to be about 20 to 30% cheaper. Gasoline is going to be more expensive than New York City, in New York City than in the state of Florida. Childcare is going to be more expensive by about $1,000, and healthcare is going to be comparable in terms of the cost. So overall, the net impact on a $100,000 income, just to simplify it, right? Your annual cost is going to be about $95,000. You're going to be struggling or in debt. Miami, it's going to be about $85,000 to $90,000. You have a little more wiggle room. Tampa and Orlando are going to win out. We're going to have about 25 to 30% in savings every single year, just based on that 100K income. And then St. Johns County, you're going to have about a 20 to 25% savings. But less risk of hurricanes, less hassle when it comes down to it. And in reality, you get a lot of bang for your buck here in St. Johns County, and you're still close to everything that Florida has to offer. Okay, so let's talk about that original quote that I started off the video with. Ryan Serhant, one of the biggest real estate agents in the world, more than likely, but definitely within New York City and the United States. He's a celebrity, was on $1 Million Listing for many, many years, created other spin-off shows, and still runs a real estate business in New York City and many other pockets across the country, where he's opened his new brokerage, Serhant, and is servicing the luxury clientele. He's one of the guys that's going to know what the luxury buyers are doing in New York City and the sellers, because he's involved with it. He's got his boots on the ground there. Funny enough, imagine if Ryan Serhant's watching this. I used to work at a coffee shop in New York City. It was actually Harold's Meat and Three, right off Canal Street in New York, and I was the manager server there. And ended up having a little brief conversation with him back when he had a beard. He lived right around the corner apparently, but very nice guy, seems very down to earth, willing to have a conversation with anyone. And I really didn't know who he was at that point. So I knew he was famous, you know, I knew he was involved in real estate, but I wasn't as knowledgeable as I am today of who he is. So very nice guy. But either way, he said that my number one job is going to be moving New Yorkers to Florida again. And that's because he's dealing with some of the wealthiest people. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that Zohran Mamdani has won the Democratic primary for the city of New York. And he's focusing on a lot of things that a lot of people, especially billionaires, are not super happy about, including raising their taxes, which I think it's only 2%. But apparently for them, and from what Ryan Serhant is saying, is that is a huge tipping point for them to where they're not going to be investing into the city anytime soon. But some of the things that he ran on was like a rent freeze, and also city-run grocery stores, and also redirecting funds, not necessarily taking and defunding the police, but redirecting funds to more social services that can help the community versus police the community. And whether you think this is wrong or right, many people think that this is going to lead to more crime in New York City. Now, I lived in New York when it was the golden years. We really had no problems at all. I worked in bars and restaurants up until 2, 3 in the morning. I'd come home to Sunset Park. Never had a problem at all in the public transportation, walking the streets in the middle of the night. Never felt unsafe in the city. But from what I've heard, since COVID especially, things have rapidly changed and deteriorated in the city of New York, which is really sad because I love New York and I don't like to hear that from other people. Side note to all of that, I did feel like when I lived in New York, you heard about all these horror stories about how bad Florida is, and that was what the news really circled around and wrestled with. And the same thing, right? I live in Florida now, so now I hear about all this negative stuff about New York when I lived in New York and I knew it was pretty sweet. So take all this with a grain of salt. I'm just pointing out what this guy is saying. Aside from that, he's also been known, prior, he stepped away from this stance that he wants to defund the police. And that was obviously a huge movement several years ago, but that's lost a lot of steam because in reality, we all know that we need those guys, right? That we need the police in our communities. And that's probably the biggest difference between New York City and the state of Florida, is that when it comes down to the police here in the state of Florida, they don't mess around. And really, if you're causing a ruckus, it's not the place to do it here in Florida. Maybe in other states, how other places are run, not here in Florida. They're really very serious. And just to speak here in St. Johns County, there was a fight between 2 kids outside the corner store here, just a couple kids in high school, nothing major, right? And just to give you an idea, 8 cop cars flying down the street, 8 cop cars, they pulled the helicopter out, right? St. Johns County is a very safe place to live. There's not a whole bunch of crime here in the area, but what I think is like they show force and they're like, hey, you're not messing around here, okay? We don't do that here. That's 100% how St. Johns County is and many areas in the state of Florida are. And the state of Florida really hasn't changed too much. In reality, there's no rent control, right? Which is, depending who you talk to, a huge pro or con in New York City. There's traditional policing, right? We really do respect our police here, and like they tell you to do something, you listen. You don't just, ignore them or argue with them, you listen to them. And I will say half the guys in St. Johns County are like 6'2" and jacked. They're huge. It's crazy. Also, St. Augustine and the state of Florida is going to be, very much about having your own individual property rights, right? And that's really what they want here, right? Whereas seems that what they're going for up there is going to be a little bit more like, this is ours, right? This is our area, right? Which Once again, pros and cons to that. And then also predictable taxation and local governance. We'll just give you one example here. I had to go to the DMV up in New York, and oh my God, I was there for 4 hours. I didn't realize you could make an appointment at that time. That was a new thing they were rolling in. I was there for 4 hours. I was late to going to work. My boss was giving me shit, and I was like, I was already there for 2. I'm not gonna come back and spend another 2. Like, I gotta get this thing done. Here in St. Johns County, you're in and out in 30 minutes. Like you're in, they call your number in, you get what you need to do, you pay your money, you get out. It's so quick, so efficient. It's way different than what you find in the city. And guys, I've helped a ton of people move from the Northeast, whether it's New York City or Boston or Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Ohio, wherever it is in the Northeast, I've helped a ton of people relocate down here. And one of the main questions that I'm getting, especially right now when you hear about all the issues of Florida's insurance market, inventory doubling and tripling here in the area, is it a good time to buy still in the state of Florida? Now, here's what I'll say. In St. Augustine and St. Johns County, 100%. I'm a realtor here. Now, that's a joke. It definitely does matter. But when you're looking at the state of Florida, every market is going to be different. St. Johns County is going to be different than Miami. Miami is going to be different than Tampa and Orlando. It's all going to be different. You need to take a look and get with a local expert in that area. What I will say is that I know New York City is still in a seller's market, right? So before, if you were looking to relocate in 2020, 2021, 2022, you were moving from a seller's market and buying in a seller's market down here across the entire state of Florida. No secret, we had huge increases in our property values since the pandemic, but you were essentially selling at a good price up here, and then you were buying and paying over asking price for a good property down here. The difference in today's world, which is what you can take advantage of, is up there you're still in a seller's market, you get the top dollar for your house, and then you can come down here and you can negotiate on homes, right? And that's where you're gonna be able to ask for a proper discount off of that property. So you're gonna take advantage of both situations. You're a buyer's market, mostly balanced inventory here in St. Johns County, but many areas in the state of Florida are going to be a buyer's market, and you're gonna be able to capitalize on that seller's market up north. So if you have any questions, if you're looking to buy, sell, or invest here in Northeastern Florida, or in all honesty, anywhere in the state of Florida, I can actually refer you to one of my partners. I really only cover about an hour around my area. So if you're looking at Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Palm Coast, Putnam County, that's gonna be me. Outside of that, I have a ton of real estate partners in the state of Florida that can make sure we can help you do what you wanna do. Until next time, guys.